Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 7th Southeast Asian Freedom of Religion or Belief Conference. The conference is a week-long activity, and we are very pleased to kick this off today with the launch of a partnership report with the Association of Progressive Communication. The title of the report is Harmony Laws in Southeast Asia, Majority Dominance, Minority Repression. Without further ado, I would like to invite Pavitra Ramanujam, Project Coordinator from the Association for Progressive Communications, to give us a welcome remarks.
Thank you so much, James. I hope all of you are able to hear me.
Loud and clear.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here at this Southeast Asia Freedom of Religion or Belief Conference. It's really wonderful to be a part of this fantastic panel and at the launch of this important report. As James said, my name is Pavitra Ramanujam. I am a coordinator at the Association for Progressive Communications. For those of you who might not be familiar with our work, APC is a global organization and a network that has, for the past 3 decades, focused on the intersection of technology, human rights, and social justice. And one of the main areas of our work in Asia has been around digital rights, especially civil and political rights that have been under fire recently in our region, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, right to privacy. And some of our focus has also been on the key social issues of our time, hate speech, misinformation, and surveillance. And I want to highlight just a couple of initiatives in particular, I think, that are relevant to our discussion here today, and which also led to this a wonderful collaboration with Asia Center. The first of which is the Challenge Project, which is a project that we are implementing across South and Southeast Asia, which focuses on 2 relevant aspects. The first of which is essentially the protection of the intersection of freedom of expression and religion online, which has come increasingly under attack. And the second of which, of course, is pushing back against hate speech and hate narratives. And the second initiative is the Cirilla initiative, which looks at mapping the key laws related to ICTs and the impact that they have on digital rights across the region in Asia. And the reason that these 2 initiatives are so important to us is when we started off about 3 years back on both of them, it was as a result of some of the observations that we had on the region, which I'm sure all of you are now familiar with as well, which is that there has been a growing sense of authoritarianism in many countries in the region. And what we realized was that one of the ways in which that was happening was through the manifestation of religious majoritarianism, right? There was a conflation of religious identities with national identities. And through that, there was a crackdown on minorities, on marginalized groups, on journalists, activists. There was a weaponization of social media. And I think that this has sort of increased as a result of the pandemic. And one of the ways that we observed that this control was being sort of implemented by governments was through a slew of new laws that were being implemented, whether it was related to hate speech or religious harmony, or the other laws that this particular report talks about. And we realized that it was extremely vital to study these laws, to understand them, to analyze the impact that they have on all of our lives and on our rights. And also because often there's sort of a ripple effect in the region, right? When one country implements a law, soon enough other countries repeat them too. And so we can understand and find ways to push back, which is why we're so incredibly happy and honored that we were able to work with Asia Center and for them to be able to put together this wonderful report on harmony laws, especially in Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, and Singapore. I just want to conclude by saying it is a really, really wonderful report. I'm sure, as James said, he'll be speaking to you about it a bit more in detail. I would really recommend all of you to read the report, and I commend the Asia Center team for putting it together. I look forward to hearing more from the panel today, and thank you so much again for having me as part of this event. Over to you, James.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pavitra, for sharing a little bit more about the work, wonderful work that the Association of Progressive Communication does, and we were part of the, the challenge project under which we were able to collaborate on this report. It's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Balazs Szanto. He's a senior researcher at Asia Center. He has been very helpful in reviewing the report, the final product, giving us suggestions. So we are grateful to him. But today, Dr. Balazs would be just providing you some welcome remarks and, his take on the top line of the report. So over to you, Balazs.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I would like to join in welcoming everybody to our presentation on the report of harmony laws in Southeast Asia. As James mentioned, this is a project in conference or in association with the Association of Progressive Communications, who supported our work on the research. And this report and this event today also represents the kickoff event for a longer set of conferences, a week-long event of the annual Freedom of Religion and Belief Network, for which this is going to be the first event, and it will go on until the end of the week. Now, I would first like to begin with thanking our speakers joining us today for the report. First, we will have Lutfi Hakim, who is an associate here at the Asia Center and also a columnist. And I sincerely apologize if I butcher anybody's name going forward. The second speaker is going to be Kinmai Ong, who is on the advisory board here at Asia Center. Then we will have Phillip Binondo, who is an assistant professor at Salle University. And finally, we'll have Subhas Nair, who is a protest rapper. Now, when we look at the report, I think...
Yeah. If you have your microphone on, could you kindly turn it off? Thank you. Please carry on.
Looking at the report, I think it's coming at a very important time. Unfortunately, if we look at the state of the world as it is today, as Pavitra has mentioned, it's not doing very well. We see a lot of rise in intolerance, and unfortunately, it's increasingly seeping into state legislature, or the state itself is an instrumental agent of such intolerance or discrimination. And the report looks at the critical issue of the intersection of ethnicity and religion in Southeast Asia, which is a dominant feature in the existing political discourse. And it is crucial to understand this intersection and how it affects the creation of laws and other governmental instruments that underpin trends of increasing dominance by majority groups in certain countries at the expense of the minority groups in these same countries. I had an opportunity to review the report and work on the report, and I think it contributes very significantly on the topic. It has been a very interesting experience to get deeper into how these specific laws came into existence and how issues that are seemingly about religious tolerance or societal harmony are nevertheless, unfortunately, deeply rooted in ethnic roots and discrimination in many of these countries. And hopefully by highlighting these trends, we can engage in the proper processes to promote real tolerance and real harmony in society, not just invoking these words to mask discrimination and majority dominance in Southeast Asia. But with that, I will pass on the baton back to James. James here is our director, and he will present a quick overview of the report after this.
Thank you very much, Balazs. So that was Pavitra and Balazs, sharing with us the opening remarks, I also want to mention Dr. Robin Ramcharan, who's the Executive Director of Asia Center, is also present, and he will do a summation after the speakers and give the closing remarks. So that's me. And very quickly, once again, Asia Center is very pleased that we work in the area, among other things, on freedom of religion or belief. Our primary work is around evidence-based research on key human rights issue affecting, Southeast Asia and larger Asia. Asia Center has also been recently accorded the ECOSOC consultative status with the UN, and we have already, made some representations during different interventions. And part of our strategy here with the promotion of this report is to also make some representation using the different UN channels. So our work began in our seminal report late last year on hate speech. The link would be sent very shortly to you or on your chat group. In this report, we try to understand hate speech as it became very, very serious, especially with the impetus of COVID-19. And in our investigation around hate speech, we found out that a lot of the emphasis around hate speech focused on, ethnicity and religion. But really, as we investigated further, we found there were other forms of hate speech also that had been latent but came out quite strongly during COVID-19. One of them is gender-based hate speech that also targeted against sexual minority. We found there was anti-foreigner or xenophobia, hate speech around there targeted at migrant workers, both documented and undocumented, refugees, foreigners, and so on. And last but not least, hate speech around political values and ideology, both within the country and also cross-border views. So it was in this context of doing this work that we found that, a range of countries around the region were either thinking of articulating or have passed laws around, ethnicity and religion, the expression of ethnicity and religion, and their primary purpose was to harmonize, to maintain, harmonious relationship among their diverse communities. Some will literally call, or passed as harmony laws. In other cases, the purpose was harmony, but the actual laws were actually named different. They range from hate speech laws to protection of religion laws as well. So moving along, I also want to highlight before I get into the report, Asia Center's annual conference takes place this year, 24th to 26th August in Thailand, which is entitled Freedom of Expression in Asia. We hope to cover these and other issues. So please look out for announcements further on. To get the ball rolling, I want to ask everyone present here, including speakers, to have a go at this first poll. Is the intersection between ethnicity and religion, from your point of view, important for understanding freedom of religion or belief and racial discrimination? The options are very important, important, not so important, and not important at all. So if you can just take a few seconds to just give us a sense of what you think about the first poll. And while the poll is running, I will just sort of move on to the next slide and just give you an overview of the ethnic composition followed by the religious composition. In Malaysia, and we have our expert speaker on panel as well. The breakdown is as follows. We have the Malays and indigenous people, at 62%. The Chinese at 20%, Indians at 6%, and non-citizens, that's the stats we got at 9.8%. And then in Myanmar, the Burma group is dominant at 68%. You'll find in the Philippines that the lingo-ethnic groups, with Tagalog being a large number, but it's not overall dominant. So that's an interesting feature in terms of composition. And Singapore, you have a Chinese majority of over 70%, and everybody else, with the Malays and Indians, very, very smaller groups. Now, let's look at the religious demographics. In terms of religion in Malaysia, Islam is the largest at 66%. In Myanmar, Buddhism is the highest at nearly 80%. In the Philippines, Christianity is at 92%. So that cuts across signifier across all the linguist ethnic groups. And then in Singapore, there's no particular religion that dominates outright. But in Singapore, it's ethnicity that's dominant, and because of the large numbers of the Chinese population. So with that, let's quickly look at how the various indicators and indexes around the world rate these countries. This index, the government restriction index, it's about restricting, religious expression, movement between religions, and so on. So the higher number is a less negative outcome, and in that regard, you find that Philippines is mostly free. Malaysia doesn't rank very well, followed by Singapore and Myanmar. And we see that in the Myanmar case, it's been worsening. So this is just to give you a sense of how, international indexes, look at, restrictions in terms of religion. Now, just to cross-reference, we can see, again, religious freedom, just to have a perspective from another index. This one looks at the both religious freedom and racial equality. The name of the index is actually outlined in the report. We have Philippines being free, and then in terms of racial equality, you have Singapore indicated as free. Now, again, these are largely based on government narratives and reports, so lived experiences are also important to cross-reference and triangulate the reality of these indexes. So I'll just, before going forward, I'll ask my colleague to just see what are the results of the poll, so we get a sense of, so about 85% of you said that the intersection between ethnicity and religion is important. And the remaining of you said, 15% said it was important. So the bulk of you said it's very important, and that kind of reflects the finding of the report as well. We saw a strong, correlationship or intersectionality between ethnicity and religion. And what it really means is, if you formulate policies, either, using ethnicity or religion as a marker, as a variable, if you use either one, it impacts the other. And the argument we are making, or the evidence in the report that allows us to make the argument, is really that, most of these laws favor the majority community, either directly or indirectly, and has an impact on minority communities. So our big takeaway here is to say that this intersection between ethnicity and religion results in discriminatory practices that primarily affect minority communities, and therefore we need to take, apart from many other remedial measures, an important remedial measures is the establishment of anti-discrimination laws and perhaps independent anti-discrimination commissions. So that's the symbolic importance of this intersectionality. And also just to take note in terms of international instruments, Malaysia and Myanmar have yet to ratify the ICRD, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. I will leave it to the speakers to perhaps give us a little bit of insight. So now just a top line. I've just really only got a couple more slides to outline. So this is what we found. These are the laws that have a direct impact on the freedom of expression and consequently on racial equality. The constitutions. Now the constitutions of the Philippines, of Myanmar and Malaysia do make reference to the majority community or religion. The Philippines does not, but its policies tend to favor the Catholic faith in terms of policies that are very aligned to the values of the Catholic faith. In Singapore, it's all about, tolerance, multiculturalism, and meritocracy, but it comes very closely, and most people miss the point about its departure from Malaysia in 1965 because of ethnic tensions, especially between the Malays and the Chinese, and how, this instrument of meritocracy, multiculturalism actually obscures the dominance of the Chinese majority and sort of puts the minority community back foot. Now, there are several instruments that are used. The penal code is the most used with provisions for incitement or disrespect, things that will give, tensions across communities. The Sedition Act is also one. Now, Singapore has done away with it because there are other rules, whereas Malaysia says it will keep the Sedition Act and it's useful for these purposes because and therefore new laws are not needed. But what is important to note is all societies have diversified in terms of its compositions. And there's also the use of new technology and social media to express, opinions around race and religion. So many countries find they need new legal tools to deal with this. And this is where, the harmony bills come in, where they look at also trying to reel in, articulations over the internet and bring in new measures. And one of them is hate speech. Hate speech laws, how to mitigate and how to use this as an instrument against primarily the airing of grievances, because the airing of grievances is seen as upsetting the status quo and may give rise to tensions. And part of the strategy is also, and this is not articulated clearly, but to also appease the majority community, because a majority community is also a player, and if they are, sentiments are upset, then it may also give rise to communal tensions. The Philippines has, an articulation of anti-discrimination law, but it's more or less silent in some of the other countries. And although if you dive down to some of the international documents around the UN, there have been calls. And our view is that this is an area of advocacy because this is really what is missing. The need for anti-discrimination law and also an anti-discrimination or independent commission. And again, our view is when we have such a law or such commissions, they need to go beyond ethnicity and religion and also include other forms of discrimination. And this is the value of our first report on hate speech, where we talk about gender, sexual minorities, xenophobia, this anti-foreign sentiment, as well as difference of opinions or discrimination based on political values and ideology. So what are the key impacts that we feel some of these laws have? They certainly, continue the ethno-religious dominance that came out of post-colonial governments. So that's one big thing, and I'll let you read the report for yourself. There's a lot of constraints around conversion and proselytization. It varies from country to country. So you will need to do a deep dive in the report, but there are restrictions, including expressions of faith that are not in line with state policies. Interfaith marriage, there are restrictions, prenuptial, clearance that need to be done. Again, they are stricter in some countries, such as in Malaysia and Myanmar. And then also the use of religious signifiers, the use of hijab and tudong in Singapore, although there's been some movement that's still there, the use of crucifix on religious documents and churches are contested in Malaysia, and so on and so forth. For example, in Singapore, the use of musical instruments, live music during the Hindu festival of Thaipusam. And last but not least, suppressing grievances, especially minority communities. And here, it's not just things that are articulated in politics, a political rally or a political speech, but also in artistic expression, because communities look for ways to express themselves, to give air to the grievances, and then these are suppressed. Like I said, not only because they don't want minority communities to air their grievances, but also to manage the reaction of the majority community. So with that, we in the report make some key recommendations, and this really is my last slide on the report. To the UN, of course, there are a range of recommendations. I'll just dive down to the main ones. We ask them to urge states to sign on to the ICRD to ensure they fulfill or at least take seriously recommendations made during the Universal Periodic Review, and to continuously request for the special reporters, to visit the countries to give us a more up-to-date picture of what's going on in the different states. Governments to reflect on the laws they have, either to repeal or amend laws. And here we call on, parliamentarians and political parties to have a conversation and discussion and debate to make better laws. For faith-based groups, a lot of them, sort of do not voice out the discriminatory practices, laws, and measures that affect minority groups. Many of the interfaith dialogues tend to be sponsored at the state level. So this particular articulation is missing, and we urge faithful groups in their dialogue to pay attention to it, and NGOs to continue monitoring the situation, and also cajole their governments, as well as make representation through the various UN mechanisms. And I think this is where Asia Center can make its contribution by submitting to the calls by special rapporteurs, or as well as making submissions during the respective UPR, or attending special consultations, of which we are part of. And in that regard, we are also happy to be part of the Southeast Asian Freedom of Religion or Belief Network. So I'll pause here just and pass over the time to my colleague, Balazs, who will then introduce each of the speakers, as well as facilitate the moderation. Balazs, over to you.
Okay, so our first speaker is going to be Lutfi Hakim, who, as we said, is an associate here at the Asia Center and also a columnist. Now, if I understand correctly, the order of speakers is determined by the countries in the report. So Lutfi would represent Malaysia. So with that, I will cede the floor to him, and hopefully we'll hear from him. No technical hiccups.
Thank you, Balazs. Thank you, James. And congratulations to Asia Center for the report. I think the report has captured succinctly the especially on the Malaysia section, the inherent tensions that exists within the country when we want to talk about racial discrimination, and how religion and ethnicity are things that you can't look at in isolation. So, and it's very difficult to tease one out from the other and deal with it in silos. So when James approached me and asked me to share my thoughts on this, and I told him, it's like, there's not much difference since the last time we spoke before. And I think in the report, it gives a good picture about what's going on and how successive attempts at addressing these issues have fallen short for the reasons that have been outlined. But I am here, so I will try to share some thoughts that I have. I think I probably should begin with something that I have had more of a first-hand experience in, which is the Asst issue. So the attempt at ratification occurred when the PH government was still around, and I was then still within that government. So it was interesting to see basically an attempt at normalizing the Malaysia standards to what we consider international norms, and the blowback that you see from it, and how, I would say, unprepared government machinery was, or at least the administration was, to deal with that kind of blowback. And how that, even when there was an orchestrated campaign that went on, there was still, the administration was still unsure about how to deal with it and how to go about it. Perhaps, and this is me speculating, because there was never a concerted interest in carrying it out. The hows and whys of how that conversation came about, I think that's a forum for another day, but it's just something that when it was announced, and the public backlash that came from it, and how attempts to deal with it just fell short. So those were things that stayed with me since those days, just in terms of why it is so difficult to get people to come around to this idea of like racial discrimination, and why it has become it's always been a challenging area in Malaysia, but I think of late it's become almost a red, not to say a red line, but an area where it defines your politics. Human rights, are you for the side of international norms or Western human rights, or are you for traditional values, religious values, and so on and so forth, which I think is a false dichotomy, but here we are. And we kind of miss what discrimination, I agree with Dikasim, who's also from Malaysia, what discrimination means to people who have to live with it on an individual level, on a daily basis. What discrimination allows to happen. We put aside why the system has been, what the system has been built upon, the colonial baggage and all of that, but what it means for Malaysians today is that means that you have limited individual control over things like the way you dress, who you want to marry, how you believe, and to a certain extent, and some of it is you can opt into this, or you can co-opt into this, like how you spend. There are a lot of issues that I think people are not fully aware that these are the implications of having widespread discrimination in society. I mean, some of it are more things that I think would have analogs in other societies. Like things like difficulty in getting rental properties, difficulty in finding job opportunities, barriers to government contracts or even corporate contracts, to be fair. So these are issues because we refuse to think of racial discrimination as something that affects everyone, but we were thinking of it in terms of them against us, one group trying to erode the rights and privileges of another group, or vice versa, that we kind of forget what it means for the individual, how it has affected, how it has impacted people's lives. Some people can't even get citizenship because of how the laws are structured. But we're thinking about how it affects the macro view rather than the micro view. So, I mean, that's the first thing I think I could share about. Secondly, when it comes to the laws and councils, Malaysia has had a Ministry of Unity in one form or another since 1972. But very rarely has it been a strong ministry, you know, an influential ministry. Rather, it has been, you know, something that you give to your political allies, you know, as a reward. And it's something that's, you know, it's supposed to make people feel warm and fuzzy. You know, time and again, they'll come up with blueprints, plans saying that this is what we need to do and how we want to build a Malaysian society. And you'll have, you know, PR campaigns, you know, and songs coming out. But here we are, and we're still talking about the same issues since 1972. So when I spoke to some of my colleagues, my ex-colleagues from those days, from my days in government, about the planned acts that they wanted to put in government, and I couldn't get a satisfactory answer about what the thought process was, or where at least on the government side, what the direction was. And credit where it's due, they did establish a committee, a council for People's Harmony, which had people from the NGOs. You know, I think Andrew, who was here, who could probably share a bit more about that. But even that has since been scrapped. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been an equivalent. But instead, we do have a committee for harmony between religious adherents, which interestingly is chaired between the Minister of Unity and Minister for Religious Affairs in the Prime Minister's Department, which is mostly concerned, or is primarily concerned about Muslim affairs. So it's interesting to see how, you know, even this conversation has moved from being, you know, something between communities, ethnic communities, or rather just like secularized in that sense, to something that's religious communities. I don't know whether that was by design, or it is something that indicates a trend where this conversation is going. But this is where we are right now. So, and again, this committee, I was trying to look up for whether there's been any significant reports or decisions that's been made, but so far it's been there has been no significant announcements or pronouncements made by this committee. So yes, as some of the participants have said, to address this requires a lot of political will, because you are essentially upsetting the status quo. Some background for those who may not be aware about how laws in Malaysia are. There is a dual legal system. We shall not get into the technicalities of which one is superior over the other, because there is also disagreement over that. Where there is Islamic or Sharia legal code, and there is the civil legal code. So there are overlapping areas which makes it difficult for things to be reconciled. Say, for example, in the area of conversion, a Muslim cannot freely convert to a different religion, because to do so he needs to have, and this is explained in the report, he needs to have permission from the Sharia courts. And it sounds possible on paper, but there have been very, very few instances of that happening, and certainly not for people who were born and raised in Muslim households. So when you have these clear demarcations, the idea of normalizing this to international norms faces very difficult challenges, because it's something that you're going against public sentiment, public sensitivities, and this is why you see a lot of blowback when there's attempts to no one's even talking about replacing laws, but just going in that direction. It can be painted as trying to challenge the status quo. So for governments to be able to change those things, it would require a lot of not just political will, but also courage. And I think a lot of smarts, because number one, how do you get into positions of power where you can affect those changes and get public buy-in for that kind of agenda? So it cannot be a bait and switch situation, because not to say that there was ever a good idea, but it has to be something that there has to be it has to come from the ground. It has to be built from the ground up. Number two, it's also not easy dealing with the let's say the implements of the state, because it's something that it is a mindset. It is a way of thinking that is deep rooted within the system itself, and has historical roots. So one cannot expect that this will go away just because we make pronouncement that we want to move in this direction. So there is a lot of I say not just unpacking, but this is a sort of like you're derooting this and trying to build a more tolerant, more open society, which means that we have to face up to where the society is, where it came from, and have a honest conversation before we can move forward. And I think just one trend that I think we're seeing, and like just following down this route, is because of how religion has the discussion on human rights has taken a more religious tinge. So, and we're seeing more conservative groups, more right-leaning groups using the same methods, same methodologies, even the same language, even to argue or to make the case for their position. And this includes making presentations to international organizations. And I think it's like from an observer standpoint, it's remarkable to see the increasing sophistication, and also how these groups have also been able to build a multicultural platform for themselves, despite what some would say a fairly exclusivist views or position on things. But that is something, but this is something that's ongoing, and this is something that has been, we can expect to grow in the next few years, and I feel will have a strong impact on the conversation in Malaysia, because what I think a lot of NGOs and civil society groups in Malaysia have experienced is it's very difficult to talk in the language of human rights to the masses, as opposed to groups which have access to Friday sermons, to government broadcasts, where they can teach about human rights, but in a way that they find acceptable. Whereas people who are working in the civil society space do not have that same access. So there is a level of asymmetrical debate going on. So it is not easy to build that case or to make that change. So final comment on what's coming ahead. As I think maybe many will be aware, there's a lot of political instability in Malaysia, and we've recently just had a state election, and which many expect to lead to a general election somewhat soon. How soon is anyone's guess at this point. So it is very unlikely that any established political parties or leaders will risk their political capital on something as potentially damaging as racial discrimination, or talking about increasing racial tolerance. because this one way or another will alienate one group of voters or will alienate all groups of voters. I think one really interesting example was the use of was the appearance and disappearance of a cross on a historical building, which was used in the recent campaign. So this was on a leaflet for a political party, and they portrayed a historical building, a Dutch colonial building, which has a cross on it, but in the leaflet it was erased. And this was not done by a Muslim party, but because of the sensitivities, because of how that can be, because it can be the moment that there is a religious symbol and it's distributed to the public, if you were a political operator, if you were doing a campaign, you would not risk that someone taking a picture of that and putting it on Facebook and saying, but this party is, is spreading photos of crosses to the public. But in turn, it has been used as a political campaign by the other side, saying, "Oh, this is what happens when you vote for this party. They'll remove crosses." So it's like, damn if you do, damn if you don't. So it becomes a very acrimonious, very difficult area to talk about or to engage in. So I find it very difficult to see that any substantial change or decisions beyond superficial announcements to come in the next few months, year or so. And added to that, you already have the current Minister of Unity saying that there is no need for new racial harmony laws. There's adequate legislation on the books and so on. So I would say that that's where Malaysia is at this current point in time. Of course, I'm very happy to hear your comments and questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We will take the comments probably at the end of the discussion. We're going to move on to Kinmai Ong, who will be here from Cambodia.
Myanmar.
Myanmar, sorry, yes. And just quickly, is that to make sure that we have enough time for questions and comments at the end, we would really appreciate if everybody could aim for 7 to 10 minutes. But with that, I cede the floor.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll be brief. In Myanmar, it's hard to talk about these issues without thinking about the coup that took place in February of this year, which really cast a shadow on the Universal Periodic Review, on this report, and on any of our consideration of these issues. And I think that the report really did a fair job of looking at and documenting the findings of the UN prior to the coup, and really showing how it's kind of was the basis and a through line for the conditions that we have today. And I think that a lot of the findings in the Universal Periodic Review and of the trends in Myanmar leading up to the coup really shows how the use of the harmony laws supporting hierarchy, majoritarianism of Buddhism and the Burma majority over true equity for minorities, and kind of what happened after the coup is, and I think James and I have argued this before the coup in some of our op-eds together, how what's been happening in Myanmar is kind of the worst case scenario of how the deterioration of civil rights that can happen when these types of kind of harmony laws being turned on their heads against minority rights for majoritarian power occur in a country in which a very authoritarian government takes place. And I think the report itself says that, on one hand, the Universal Periodic Review, analysis is quote, obsolete. It used that word, but at the same time, I think it's very much relevant in terms of showing the setup of how the use of the harmony laws and the introduction of new laws and trends in the country, the majoritarian trends, created a situation when the military government took place, and they had, as they always had, I suppose, but all these tools that they've been using to oppress journalists, to oppress activists, to oppress dissidents and religious and ethnic minority, or continue to oppress religious and ethnic minorities. So I think Myanmar, more than anything else, in addition to being, a place that I hope will continue to be in your attention, notwithstanding the dire situation that it's at, kind of a wake-up call for what can happen in other places should things go south. I mean, in Myanmar, like as many of you know, rights have always revolved around citizenship, which has not been available to everybody. The Rohingya very publicly lost citizenship and lost all rights and were brutally oppressed. And the national identity has always, since the military took over in the early 60s, increasingly revolved around the Bama majority, which has continued on in this semi-democratic era. I think there were opportunities to dismantle that majoritarian focus on the Bama identity, but that unfortunately didn't happen. And same with religion, where the Burmese identity has always very much, since the military era, since the 1960s, focused on the Buddhist identity, even though, as you saw on the slides earlier, it is a very diverse country. And there were opportunities to dismantle and diversify that during the democratic era, the semi-democratic era, which didn't happen. And in fact, there was a rise, as you know, of Buddhist extremism, which kind of polarized things even more. Certainly during the, I won't go over them in detail because I know we're in short time, but certainly during the semi-democratic era, there was an increase in the use of the harmony laws for majoritarian power and to oppress minorities, both in terms of colonial, all laid out, I think, nicely in the report, both in terms of colonial era laws, which were originally created to support the Burmese and the Buddhists from oppression from the colonial authorities, which were increasingly used to target any kind of, for instance, like laws protecting religion, which were disproportionately used to protect against perceived attacks against Buddhism. And where I think religious discriminations against any kind of minorities, religious minorities, were much less likely to receive that protection. There were also, I think, an increase in very disturbing laws that I think, or proposals that actually called out different minority religions and had a differential impact on their face. Laws that made it, that were proposals that would make it more difficult to convert, as Lutfi was saying in Malaysia, proposals and laws to make it more challenging for Buddhists, and particularly Buddhist women, to outmarry, proposals relating to marriage rates, birth rates among different minority communities, by religious minority communities, by regulating the length of time between children. And these were proposals that I think take it to the next level, insofar as they weren't kind of facially neutral, in that, like it wasn't like something that protects religion but was disproportionately used to protect religion, but actually on their face favors Buddhism over or the Bama or certain ethnic groups over others. I mean, one thing I will say though, is that after the coup, as a result of just the tragic brutality of everything that's happened, and the complete wipeout of all the activists in the country, the oppression against journalists, and the like threat of all-out civil war, which is very concerning to me. I live in the United States. I'm not actually in Myanmar, fortunately, as you would probably guess. I think that there's finally an opportunity whenever we're at the end of this situation. This is the end game where I think there is finally an opportunity where we can do away with this majoritarian Burma Buddhist-centric regime in the country, because what's happened is kind of similar to the military era where I grew up. There was just basically everybody who is against the military kind of was in a coalition, regardless of whether you were Burma, whether you were an ethnic minority, whether you were Buddhist or a religious minority. And the opportunity for those different interests to come together during the semi-democratic era didn't happen. But now, because of just the massive bloodshed that has happened and might continue onward, and the fact there's been actual active warfare in central Myanmar, I think that at whatever the end of the struggle in the country, that there's finally an opportunity to really look at afresh these harmony laws and create new harmony laws that genuinely protect, recognize majority interests, but also genuinely protect minority interests, be they religious, be they ethnic, be they political, be they sexual orientation. I think that there really is finally an opportunity to do that. And I hope that in the other countries in Southeast Asia, that there are opportunities to do that without this type of dramatic deterioration.
Thank you very much. We can move on to our third speaker, John Phillip Binondo, who again is an associate professor at the Salle University, to share a perspective from the Philippines.
Thank you. Good morning again to everyone. I'm honored and privileged to be part of this panel on the 7th Southeast Asia Freedom of Religion or Belief Conference, and I congratulate Asia Center and Association for Progressive Communications for this excellent report, and I really do encourage everyone to read it and familiarize yourself with it, as it provides a really robust baseline to have a discussion on what are really the realities that are happening, and also give us a perspective of how we could engage the international mechanisms to promote these particular rights in respect to both racial and ethnic minorities. So today, I'll try to keep this also short. I only have 4 points that I really want to, have or center this discussion around. But just to provide an introduction, the Philippines is one of the ethnically diverse countries of Southeast Asia, which does not have harmony laws exactly similar to some of our neighbors in place to promote social stability and order. However, it's also one of the countries that is a latecomer in passing legislation to protect the rights and well-being of ethnic and racial minorities. Furthermore, the most recent passage of the anti-terror law poses to undermine the situation of both ethnic and religious minorities that have long been marginalized and left vulnerable. So this report on harmony laws in Southeast Asia, policing faith and repressing rights, presents some of the more inherent and systematic issues in relation to religion and race in the Philippines, and of course in the 3 other countries that we've been hearing about, and later on we'll hear from Singapore. But besides the issues identified by the report, what also stands out from my observation and reading of this particular document are some of the domestic realities that are the lived experiences, as mentioned by as mentioned earlier, and yet they remain invisible due to the absence of formal data on these matters. So this is really what I want to highlight in my intervention today. And there are 4 points that I wish to specifically address, which first will talk about the absence of disaggregated official data based on ethnicity, and based on the information that was presented to us earlier, that doesn't really provide the complete picture. So I will try to explore that a little bit more. Second is sort of assess what are the legal remedies and protections for minorities in the Philippines. Third, I want to focus specifically on the conditions of Filipino Muslims and how they're left more vulnerable after the anti-terror law, as well as the conditions of the ethnic minorities throughout the different islands of the Philippines. And lastly, I'm going to talk about very briefly secularism and the issue on the separation of church and state here in the Philippines, as that has really been the most important determinant of what kind of policies are really implemented, passed, discussed, debated upon, as it's undeniable that the Catholic Church has indeed and continues to have very strong influence over the political discourse that is happening. On the first issue of the absence of disaggregated official data, really the issue here is that it makes it very difficult to determine the true extent of racial and ethnic disparities and inequalities that are experienced by minority groups. So, officially, when we look at the Philippines, and when we look at the major ethno-linguistic groups, there are the 8 main ones, but in reality, there are over 120 different languages that are spoken over these 7,000 islands that we live here, that I live in. And besides that, there are also other categories of ethnicity that most of the official state data overlooks. When we look at people of African descent like myself, or when we look at people who are of Chinese descent, which are a lot of times overlooked, and we, only if we have this kind of data, we'll be able to realize the real disparities and inequalities that exist. When you take a look at the top 10 most richest people in the Philippines, 7 of them are of Chinese descent, but when you look at the population, it's not really reflected how, what percentage of the population they really belong to. And, these are also important factors when we look at, the aggregate issues of human rights. So the data available, really only provides information across the ethnic groups that don't capture, again, this ethnic reality or the ethnic diversity of the country. So what's really important is for the Philippines, to be able to collect data that's disaggregated based on ethnic and religious lines, perhaps, during the census. But the other issue that this is also interrelated to is some of the, as mentioned also in the report, some of the growing anti-Chinese sentiments that was inflamed also because of the current administration that we have. But even before that, the Chinese have also been experiencing, or people of Chinese descent have also experienced microaggression, prejudice against people of, Chinese descent, also because of the disproportionate wealth that a lot of them really enjoy. So I think these are critically as important to really talk about. And for people like myself or of African descent, we're also prejudiced in a way that's based on prejudice and negative representations in mainstream media. And these are things that are not really captured or reflected by data that is provided by the government. And it goes back to talking about what we were talking about. It was mentioned earlier that it's important to really get the voice of civil society as much as we can. So for this reason, this is one of the reasons why the issues on racial and ethnic discrimination remain outside the public view in the Philippines. And the data really does not provide, enough information for us to look at trends and really analyze them, unless we're also, we're able to successfully integrate information from civil society, which, is not always able to participate and submit data, for the UPR or the other treaty bodies that conduct these reports. On the second issue of the assessment of legal remedies and protections for minorities, really the status of the laws here in the Philippines is untested, nascent, and until this year, almost non-existent, especially when we talk about legal remedies or protection against racial and religious discrimination. Although it's important to also note that our 1987 Constitution, right after the martial law period, did guarantee freedom of religion and belief. It was not spelled out as it should be and as also required by international treaties like the ICERD and the ICCPR, or the Civil and Political Rights and the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So, this House bill that was passed this year, the bill was agreed upon in Congress in 2020 and came into law this year. It's called the Act of Protecting and Promoting the Rights to Equality and Non-Discrimination on the Basis of Race, Ethnicity, and Religion. Was only passed, in the 18th Congress. So when we take a look at it, this is something that's quite problematic, especially considering that the Philippines was one of the original signatories of the ICERD back in the 1960s before it even came into force. So, what accounts for the reason of this only being translated into domestic legislation, in year 2020. So, these are some of these issues that we face. And for this reason also, there was no way for victims of racial discrimination and, to a certain extent, religious discrimination to look for legal remedies to their problems. And the good thing about this new law that was passed, it pretty much guarantees access to education, public participation, employment, delivery of goods and services, and also housing or acquisition of land. But it also tries to address discrimination that takes place, in the spheres of advertisement and mass media, or also of wrongful portrayal, and even discrimination through speech, utterances, acts of hatred, and similar acts. And not to mention that it also includes profiling. So in a sense, it's a very promising law, but again, it's still very new, it's untested, and something that's also critical to mention about this is that it does not create an independent body to monitor and ensure the implementation of this law. But what it does do is it creates, or it at least tries to propose, the creation of non-discrimination and equal opportunity committees across existing institutions. And a lot of the burden now is passed on to the Commission on Human Rights, the National Commission on Indigenous People, and the National Commission of Muslim Filipinos, and even the civil service. But again, in order for these laws to be better protected, it would be better if there was a specific independent body. So the last two things that I really want to talk about is the situation of the Muslim population and the indigenous people. And important to mention is that the Muslim community in the Philippines has, in a way, been better treated perhaps compared to other religious minorities in other countries. And perfect examples or exemplifications of this have been the formation of the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao back in 1989 and the most recent Bangsamoro autonomous region. However, the backsliding, or at least what could be seen as possible areas that to make these groups vulnerable, has been the anti-terror law, which has left the population and of course also indigenous people vulnerable to red tagging or being labeled as part of the terrorist or the communist terrorist group, which really makes it more difficult for them. And this had a lot to do again with the Marawi siege that happened back in 2017, which lasted for 5 months and really made us, one of those areas rife for radicalism. So, and Islamic radicalism, and this is the reason why profiling has really affected them. But the problem with the anti-discrimination law has really been that it defines terrorism in a very vague way, giving also government excessive and unchecked powers, and also extends the period of detention, giving the executive body way too much discretion. And in relation to indigenous people, they've also been at risk of economic exploitation over their cultural practices and traditions, as well as threats and access to resources and ancestral domain. A lot of times, private businesses have been able to exercise greater influence and control over conditions, decisions, and legislations that are favorable to them at the expense of indigenous people. And the most prominent of these issues have been the Dumagat people, who have been left vulnerable not only to things that are happening by government institutions or social institutions, but to climate change, which has forced also the government to sort of adopt new projects like dam construction, which threatens to displace them from their indigenous land. So this is really something that, is quite important to them, because their rights are coming at the expense, or the rights of those living in urban areas are coming at the expense of the Dumagat. Second is the Lumad community, which is composed of around 12 to 15 indigenous groups from Mindanao, and their schools have been labeled as indoctrination camps for communist terrorist groups. So this again, is showing how the profiling is negatively and disproportionately targeting people who are Muslim and also indigenous people, making it very difficult. And lastly also is the mistaken identity that two Aitas, who these are indigenous people from central Philippines, that were charged with shooting police officers and even killing one. And this was actually one of the manifestations of how the anti-terror law was really something that provided excessive discretionary power to the government. And these people luckily were acquitted and the case was dismissed by the Supreme Court. But nevertheless, it really shows how vulnerable certain groups have been left. The last point I really want to make before I come to my conclusion is that secularism and separation of church and state have been undermined in favor of the Christian religion. And the report also does a really good job in explaining how this happens. But among the things that I really want to touch upon this morning is how this continues to expose the influence of conservative religious groups that oppose divorce and criticize important elements of reproductive rights and women's rights. So religious sub-denominations also like Iglesia ni Cristo have been criticized and continue to face prejudice for mobilizing followers to vote for a particular candidate as part of their religious bloc, instead of their personal preferences. So again, we're seeing religion being used and mobilized in a way that favors only a certain group of people. So the prospects for greater religious and ethnic harmony will really depend on religious institutions refraining from exercising too much influence in political matters that promote their parochial interest. In conclusion, there's a need to conduct a more robust study on racial and religious equality conditions here in the Philippines. The role of civil society organizations will be crucial given the lack of official government data on these issues. Furthermore, better understanding across the different religions and ethnicities need to be fostered to overcome the inherent prejudices that influence people's attitude and behaviors towards one another if we really want to overcome these systemic issues. So thank you everyone for your attention, and I hope I didn't take too much time. I want to give it back to the host. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we can move on to our last speaker for the day, Subhas Nair, who is a protest rapper from Singapore.
Hi everyone, can you hear me well? Okay, lovely. So again, first of all, congrats to Asia Center for the report, and thank you everyone who has shared so far. I've learned so much just from today's hearing, just listening to you all speak. I know you've heard from many people, and I'm honored to be joining this esteemed panel as a special rapporteur myself. My name is Subhash, and I make protest music in Singapore. I do my best to speak truth to power and add to the many voices from the ground that are working towards political change. So first, we've got to give a shout out to the Ministry of Home Affairs, who are going to be watching this later. But I have to share, so today I want to share a little bit from the ground, right? The lived experience of being Indian in Singapore, and also, I mean, if I can speak just today for brown people in Singapore, right? People who have been minoritized, not necessarily minorities in Singapore. So when we think of Singapore, I mean, we always, you think of like meritocracy, racial and religious harmony. We have it in our national pledge, regardless of race, language, and religion. But I think there's a reason why it's in our pledge, is to give that impression of something that's ostensibly happening, something that can be easily reproduced by ministers on their overseas staycation to these fancy conferences and photo ops. But you see, the issue of like human rights in Singapore cannot be reduced to debates or talking points. Singapore is and always has been engineered at the expense of the minority, from migrant workers to working class Singaporeans. Singapore has been built on the backs of the people, but its fruits have never been equally or even fairly shared. So when I see in Singapore, I see more harm than harmony, really. A hyper-capitalist system where people are forced fit into these aggregated race categories, where languages are reduced to dialects that are not available for study in government schools, and where without safeguards like minimum wage for all, many people who are wage laborers are too busy just trying to survive, where people brush race or religion related issues under the carpet instead of understanding the tools to respect differences. Ultimately, Singapore is a machine that never stops churning profits, regardless of race, language, or religion. And when people set up independent platforms that represent plot twists to the state-controlled narrative, like that of mine, of New Narratives, who's doing really important regional work, Kirsten Hans, or the Transformative Justice Collective in Singapore, they are admonished, censored, persecuted, to make examples of them to people, to remind everybody to stay in their place and never challenge power. The ironic thing is that in Singapore, when you speak about racism, you are the racist. My sister and myself were referenced in the report, and I think it's just important I just expand on that a little bit. I made a song 2 years ago after an incident of brown face in a state-controlled media, like the Media Corp in Singapore. An ad agency in collaboration with Media Corp did this ad with a Singaporean Chinese man playing the role of 4 characters, darkening his face to play an Indian man, and then wearing a tudong to represent a Malay Muslim woman. And me and my sister said no more. So we make music, we make rap, so we responded through art. And immediately, right, the state clamped down. And the Home Affairs Minister, who's also an ethnic minority, said that, if we let this video go, hundreds of videos will show up like this. Of course, the slippery slope is only slippery on the side that power determines, right? So instead of look, if we let this go, imagine the harm to our communities. What more would people do? At least we give them a chance to hear that, hey, we are saying this is not okay. I think the problem is that they use racial harmony as a cover to really actually to censor criticisms of the state. In the song, many of the issues brought up were not just everyday racism, but systemic institutionalized racism. And the state uses penal codes and sedition acts to punish and persecute. 3 years on, like now, I am actually, next Monday, I have a court date because they gave me a conditional warning, me and my sister. And allegedly, after speaking again about these discrepancies in how the rule of law is applied. So I violated the conditional warning, and so now there's a new case. But this is all good. Some trouble is good trouble. But again, I go back to this thing. As you talk, if you talk about race, you are the racists. Except not every time. Because you see, in 2020, there was another artist who made a racist remark to a fellow artist, Indian lady named Priyagita Dia, calling her, excuse my language, but a snake whore, and saying that, sorry about that, and saying that she can obliterate a minority cult. In this case, there was no police investigation or charge. The examples are plenty. My experience is that there's a very different set of rules that police minorities as compared to people who belong to majority ethnic groups, or who are wealthy. 3 hours is how quickly the IMDA and the state clamped down on the video that my sister and I produced. They issued a takedown notice and were like, they would come get us if it was still online. They deemed the video to promote racial and religious enmity between groups. Yet, also in 2020, a bigoted homophobic video comparing members of the LGBTQIA+ community to the devil, made by 2 Chinese Christians on behalf of their church, was allowed to stay online for days and there was no charges filed. It is no surprise to me that one of the people in the video is the daughter of one of Singapore's richest men. There cannot be 2 sets of rules in a country. So I think reflecting on this, I really want to go back to 2 things that came out in the report, right? Two, I guess, of these prime examples of how Singapore has racial harmony or safeguards for minorities, and how they actually play out on the ground. First is the minority representation rules in the GRCs. Now, what that has really done is create this idea of a model minority in Singapore. It's a running joke in the Indian community that if you go to a SAP school, if you study Mandarin, if you marry a Chinese wife, you'll be a shoo-in for parliament. But of course, you must also be a corporatist and willing to sell out and or police your own community. Okay, the real problem, right, is that people who are ethnic minorities who are elected don't actually represent the needs of the people. Fanon wrote so pointedly, albeit in vastly different circumstances, about the roles those who are oppressed must play for upward social mobility in black skin, white masks. Here in Singapore, it's brown skin, white collars. We don't see ourselves in our leaders, you know. We see people here to maintain status quo and silence issues within their communities, and a political system that is set up to consolidate power and wealth, not to represent the voices of all of us. Also, for ethnic minority leaders who are in parliament, especially for opposition party members, there is a disproportionate level of scrutiny for minority candidates. Case in point is Raisa Khan, the youngest MP in Singapore's history. People often critique this idea of a reserved slot in these GRCs for minorities, but never how the other 3 or 4 slots in each GRC is also essentially reserved for majority slots that may or may not go to the best candidates available. And many ministers and MPs in Singapore are parachuted into these positions of power. So many government-linked enterprises or corporations and positions of political power, these people are plucked from positions in the military, leading to a disproportionate amount of cishet Chinese men who are the lead decision makers in civil society and corporate Singapore. So we must ask, who really gets to rise through the ranks through power in Singapore, or the ranks in military, where there is rampant discrimination, especially against Malay Muslims in Singapore. Now, the second example that was brought up in the report is this ethnic integration program, ethnic integration policy. Really, it's a thinly veiled policy to make sure there's a Chinese majority voting base all across Singapore. And it's ridiculous because it works on a very racist premise that naturally occurring enclaves are wrong or dangerous, that people cannot figure out where we want to live and who we want to live with ourselves. So I'm sure I'm sure everyone has read the report, but what it is it ensures a certain kind of race quota, Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others, as problematic as the races like those categories are, but it ensures a certain composition per housing estate in Singapore. But what's ridiculous at that's what you see, right? That's the veneer. What actually happens on the ground is actually quite ridiculous when you're an Indian family applying for a block, but there's no more quota, right, to live in a place like maybe even Little India. But if you are in an interfaith marriage, right, so that's an indicator of harmony. That's a good thing, right? Interfaith marriage. The thing is, you can declare whether you're Chinese, Indian, or Malay, depending on whatever suits you or whatever suits the housing block you want to apply to live in. So that's one of those things where it's like, yes, it's good, malleability of race, a man-made construct, right, at the end of the day, but also, wow, what is this a sign of? Is this just, again, an example of like one of these things where on paper it looks good, it looks great, it looks nice at like maybe in the UN when we are trying to resist change, but really on the ground it's quite ridiculous when it's played out. And also, we talk about the ethnic integration policy when it comes to buying homes, but the rental market, as brought up earlier, a simple look at some of these Instagram pages that are set up, like at Minority Voices, for example, will show rampant rental discrimination and racism. Like ads that say no Indians, no cooking of curry, no migrant workers. These are all completely legal in Singapore. And there's no, other than these Instagram pages, like there's no actual, nothing being done at a policy level to kind of clamp down on these things. And this has happened for years. So yeah, I would say that let me just bring all these thoughts together. Yeah, I would say that Singapore has never been post-colonial. I would say Singapore has been most colonial. We must never forget that the founding father of modern Singapore has openly said that if Singapore were 100% Chinese, we would do better. But we are not and will never be, so we live with what we have. I am quoting. So recently when hijabi women were allowed to wear a tudong at work, right? And that too only in one sector of healthcare. This change just came a few months ago when Lee Hsien Loong made this announcement, and starting this month, actually, they can wear their headscarves. But this is something that minority groups, especially Muslim women, have been advocating for years. The fact that Chinese leaders can grant this right to their benevolence and fancy, rather than it being enshrined as a human right for all, is a cause for concern. It feels like the only place that there is representation of brownness is behind bars or in the gallows. But there is hope, always. Recently in a music festival, Bay Beats, there were many artists in their early 20s expressing support for abolishing the death penalty and solidarity with myself, who was going through this court case right now. And Malaysians and Singaporeans have been connecting in the Save Nagendran campaign. Note that I didn't say the nation state of Malaysia and Singapore. I said Malaysians and Singaporeans, people coming together to resist power and to stand on the right side of history. So as I close, I think I really want to leave on 2 points, and that's about scale and impact of what we can do. And I think these are actually things that are actionable towards harmony in not just in Singapore, but hopefully in Southeast Asia. And one is mutual aid. It is exactly how we must resist this charity model of supporting each other, of coming together as communities, of celebrating each other. And Lutfi shared this a little bit earlier, because pathways to positions of power are oftentimes mirages, and reforms simply don't work in some issues. So change cannot only happen every 6 years when there's an election. It needs to happen every day. And so if anybody would like to get in touch about migrant mutual aid, do reach out. My friends and I are organizing on that front. And so that is I guess at a cellular level, at the everyday level, mutual aid organizing. But I think there needs to be something more that happens in terms of the region. And that regional solidarity is really, really crucial here. Nagendran's case is a very, I hope everybody knows about his case, but I think that's a very good example of how we need to come together to change, there's that international kind of boomerang effect of advocacy, right? And social media is a very powerful tool, but a lot of these issues also privileges English-speaking content and what's going on in the Western world. We need to get educated through events like this, through our songs, our art, our stories, and engage each other across borders, which are another made-up concepts. So I would just close by saying, as long as racists are making policy, we will have racist policy. As long as the elite few in the country are making the rules will always disproportionately affect and harm those who are disenfranchised and unrepresented. We're not here to, and I say we as in all of us, all of our races, all of us people who are working on the side of change. We're not here to check boxes or kowtow to power. I think we are unafraid and here for justice and equity for all. Majulah Singapura.
Thank you very much. With that, we reach the end of our speakers. Before we move on to the Q&A session, I would like to invite you all to fill out our second poll, where the question is going to be, in your country or experience, do laws and policies related to race and religion benefit the dominant ethnic religious group? And the 4 answer possibilities are going to be all the time, most of the time, some of the time, or not at all. And also, while we are going to do the Q&A session, we also invite you to fill out a survey about today's proceedings. But I think the QR code is going to be posted for that on the screen afterwards. And with that, I would like to open the floor for questions to our speakers. Okay, while some people might be formulating questions in their minds, we can move to some of the questions that were submitted in advance. I think one question that would be worth tackling is, do you see these so-called harmony laws as opening or closing public space for freedom to practice, manifest, and express one's religion? It wasn't posed to any specific one of our speakers, so I invite any one of them who would like to respond.
I mean, I think I would just say briefly, I mean, from certainly, my observations regarding Myanmar and what I've heard from my co-panelists, so far, these particular laws do not seem to hold much promise, but I think that, the idea is that we can learn from this to move toward both laws, harmony laws that do protect minority rights that are different from the ones that we have right now on the books in these different countries, as well as finding more neutral ways to apply those laws that are neutral and can be applied more neutrally.
Am I speaking? Thank you. Well, I kind of messed up the order, but I don't think we have Lutfi anymore. So would John would like to respond?
Yes, thank you. I very much agree with what Kinmai has mentioned. Although I believe that they serve as a baseline, as something to work on and improve on, that they can be enhanced. I mean, because at the end of the day, we need these laws to begin somewhere, but we shouldn't be complacent with the laws that are there, and always try to be current based on the developments that are happening. So, in a way, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I pass the baton on to Subhas.
I totally agree with both those responses. And I also think harmony laws must come in conjunction with universal basic rights and incomes, but also if we think about defensible space theory, people must want to come together. People must want to live together harmoniously. People must love the spaces, feel that they can invest in communities and businesses around them at a local scale. So I think I am in favor of laws that protect the rights of everybody. I'm in favor of laws not to dictate how people should come together, but to make sure that that people who are trying to actively attack or erode the rights of those who are especially the vulnerable in society, then there should be laws in place there should be there's space for legal recourse. Yeah, so but it's very tricky, and I think it has to be a process where people can have a voice in the shaping of those laws.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? What are key recommendations to governments and lawmakers on how to create real equality, equal rights in theory and practice in a society? And we can go in the usual order. I can pass the question to Khin.
Man, you guys are making me start both times. I mean, I think it's hard to figure out a one size fits all for this, but I think it depends a little bit on the political infrastructure in each country. But I think the most important thing is element is working toward a political system where you actually minority voices can be heard and expressed. Like Subhash's description about the housing apportionment system in Singapore, it sets up a situation where minority voices are going to be diluted because they're not going to be concentrated in any particular area. And I don't think it's just about geographic distribution, but figuring out the infrastructure of a political system such that you can amplify and hear minority voices rather than having majoritarian rule. Like you can't have, what we're going toward, it seems in Southeast Asia, is like a tyranny of the majority, even if you have a very robust democracy. So, that's what I would say.
Thank you very much. I can pass the baton on to John.
Yes, I very much agree with Kim there. And for me, I would like to, I guess, just promote the idea of participative governance and participative decision making. You know, if you want to make laws that will impact us, our voices do have to be heard and should be heard, and we should be given an opportunity to at least provide feedback so that there's a better way to gauge how these things are going to impact all the different stakeholders in society. But I always like to go back to, we need to have the baseline of information to really know how all these different laws are impacting different people. Because until we don't know that, then we won't be able to even design or propose any kind of legislation that would support them, especially those who are marginalized and vulnerable.
And finally, we can invite Subhas to share his thoughts.
No, I totally agree. I think those are very eloquently put.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker from the audience who would like to pose a question.
Hello. I am Bunthon. I am Dr. Bunthon Chantalavong Wisa. I am the president of the Alliance for Democracy in Laos. I have question for you. I have question about how can we have a new law for protection the right for the people in Laos. Now the Chinese people in China had too much influence in Laos. Second one is Vietnam had too much influence in Laos. The people, the Chinese people, they have more right than Lao people now. Vietnamese people too, they have more right than Lao people now. We can have some law to protect the people in Laos. This is my question.
Thank you very much. I think just to mix things up, we can go in reverse order amongst our speakers. So we don't put always the same person on the spot. So I think we can start with Subhas, whatever he would like to reflect on it.
Right, and so you have to forgive my ignorance. So I'm not and too sure of the specificity of like what's going on in Laos. But I will just maybe say one really important thing, and that is like, I think back to this idea of us holding our governments accountable for interference and kind of, to me, it's imperialism and what goes on in other countries. Like I mean, Singapore has blood on its hands when you talk about what's happening with the Burmese junta, So I think we need to make sure that there is space for and for people to hold into account like what our countries are doing in other parts of the region. But I think I'll pass the time because I'm not informed enough about this situation.
Thank you very much. Would John like to share his thoughts on the subject?
Yes, I mean, I pretty much believe that, again, it's, as I'm not a Laos citizen, so I don't really have as much influence over how the government is elected, although I believe that Laos is also a single party. But I think the best way, perhaps as a community in the ASEAN, we can help each other is through capacity building, perhaps more partnerships and perhaps more collaboration on a civil society level so that the citizens of Laos can get a greater sense of empowerment to make the changes that they feel are necessary within their own system, because we know how it is here in the ASEAN. We have the ASEAN way of non-intervention, non-interference, and all of these sensitive political matters are supposed to be talked, behind closed doors and back channel conversations. But I believe it's on a civil society level that perhaps we can help each other and empower the organizations there to empower in turn their own citizens. So I think that would be my suggestion to address this particular question.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker is Khin. So
Yes,
I
and
invite her to
thank you
reply.
for not making me go first again. I appreciate it. I agree. I agree with everything that's been said. I also am not a Laos expert, but I think that with regard to Myanmar, there were similar issues. Very different environment, but in terms of foreign influence, and in particular with China as well, and as well as other foreign investors. And what I would say to the advice that I would give to civil society activists in Laos is to network with other civil society activists in other peer activists in other Southeast Asian countries to kind of coordinate and support each other. I mean, I think coordinated effort through ASEAN can work, but as was said by previous speakers, I think it's a political body and it's going to be of limited utility. But I think networks like we have here in Asia Center and through other peers who are interested in the same thing and who understand how these dynamics work out. We don't have to understand what's happening in Laos to write a letter or to lobby our own people to support. And I think that those are things that peer civil society groups can best help and kind of understand each other's issues, notwithstanding the different political environments in different countries.
Thank you.
Okay. First, all poll results are in, and if my short-sightedness serves me correctly, the most popular, there's basically a tie between all the time and most of the time, both of them coming in at 41% to the question of whenever in your country or experience do laws and policies related to race and religion benefit the dominant ethnic religious group. There is 3% who argued that it does not affect them at all, and 14% who said it affects them some of the time. Now, we have time for one final question, after which we will invite Dr. Ramcharan to deliver his closing remarks. But that last question is going to be, in terms of hate speech and harmony laws, the narrative of governments in the region is that we cannot have freedom of speech a la America because racial harmony is a very sensitive issue, and we cannot afford the racial riots which we see there. Does the panel agree with this assessment? And if so, what is the way forward? For final time to mess around with the order of our speakers, I will invite John first to give his remarks, and then we'll proceed from there.
Yes, thank you. I was going to raise my hand anyway, but for me, my approach to these kind of issues are just because we live in Southeast Asia doesn't make us any less human. We're all human beings across different parts of the world. And while political contexts might differ, I believe that, there are certain rights that should be inherent and should be guaranteed. So I think that, governments always try to say what's in their own best interest and not necessarily the best interest of their citizens. So I don't think we should be limited by this perception of governments in Southeast Asia. So I don't necessarily agree with this. I believe harmony can still, take place if we have, respectful dialogue with all the different members of our community. So I think this is something that is very much achievable. It's more when we repress different groups that we end up with more problems. So that's my take on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will invite Subhas to reflect on it?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I actually hate it when people bring up America because while I totally agree about our shared humanity and interconnectedness, I think it is almost like a very easy way to brush. It's like whataboutism, right? Like, and it's a slippery. It's a weird thing where people always go to like they pick and choose when they want to bring up certain countries and contexts. Like especially as a rapper, right? Hip hop is a black art form, and sometimes so quickly people are dismissed and like, oh, you can't be pro LGBTQIA plus. I mean, that's just American values, and I'm like, what, like, you know, who decides our values? What is our value as Singaporean? And I mean, it's always like you suddenly pick from America and say like, oh, we can't have this from here. But migrant workers, oh, compared to Bangladesh, third world, like, you know, it's so much better here than there. You know, it's always in the side, at the end of the day, how you twist it, it's always in the side of like capital, I feel. And I think one important thing that to talk about here is, while we talk about harmony laws, I think I want to be clear on my position here, which is that censorship is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, I think that, and it's ironic I might say that as a rapper, but I think like we have to be intolerant of intolerance, and there have to be like things, laws in place, I feel, that are consultative, participatory, and put together with by the people, really. But I think that not like some things cannot be said, some things shouldn't be said, and of course that's debatable, that's arguable, and I think most important thing is that there are consequences to those things, and those things just right now the problem is that they're so too often determined just by people who are in the ethnic majority in Singapore. And one more thing, just on the point of like when we talk about America, I think that we only think about America in terms of like when drawing the boundaries of like, oh, what we shouldn't become, or look there, this is the problem. And our ministers say that all the time. They said it even after our rap video. I think we, the people, also in all our organizing, in all our work on the ground, it's really important also that America and I guess Black liberation movements all over the world, in Haiti, in just what we have learned from Black folk is so important and crucial. And I think there's a lot of anti-Blackness in Southeast Asia, in Singapore too. And so I think that it's really important that we don't just take like things are not, you can't just pick and choose what is American, you know, and we are all through this, there's international solidarity through this, and we have learned so much from people all over the world. And that is, I guess, where our shared humanity lies. And I think that's where we got to focus on.
Thank you very much. And now, last but definitely not least, I would invite Khin to reflect on the point said.
I have so much to say about this, and this could be like the subject of an entire panel, but I realize we're 20 minutes over. So just briefly, so just as like full disclosure, I'm American. I'm Burmese American. I was born in Burma. I lived in Malaysia as a child, and I lived most of my life in the United States. And my career in the United States is around civil rights for racial minorities in the United States. I got involved in some of the work that I do with Asia Center as a result of the kind of majoritarian, like anti-democratic tendencies that rose in Myanmar. And what I would say is just this, very simply, I think things in the United States can be very messy, but it is not because of laws to protect racial minorities and religious minorities. It is not because of community-based efforts for minority rights. It is because, quite frankly, of the regressionist, reactionary response of our majority, not all people in our majority, but of certain elements in our country that would like to preserve white power, a Judeo-Christian and really more specifically Christian power dynamic. And that is why it is not because of racial justice and civil rights laws and movements in the United States, but despite and in response to that we are having that. So what I would encourage, and this is why I'm doing this. I mean, it is almost 11 o'clock in New York City. But this is why I'm here on this panel with all of you, is that I really want Southeast Asia, which is where I'm from, to go in that direction in a way that makes sense for the country, not like to be just like the United States or Western liberal democracies, but to figure out a way to navigate this on its own terms and own cultural identity. But I feel very strongly that it like pushing forward on the right racial harmony laws and the right protections of civil rights is not what causes protests and discontent. I've been here last summer with the racial justice protests. They were peaceful. It was the responses of people from the majority who found this unwelcome and found the diversification of our country, of people like me coming here, that caused this.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that was our last question for the day. So I will invite Dr. Ramcharan to deliver his closing remarks as Executive Director of Asia Center.
Very good. Thank you, Balazs, and thank you to all the speakers. And of course, this is, as usual, a very fascinating area, which we can talk about endlessly. So let me just say very briefly that I want to say thanks to the APC for partnering with us on this report. And of course, we are very happy to present it in the context of the CFORB International, CFORB Network International Meeting Conference, which, as Dr. Balazs has said, continues over the next 2 weeks. So very quickly, here are some quick points. We don't have much time left. So in the interest of time, a few, 2, 3, 4 very quick points. One is, as we have discovered, and as you all know, FORB, freedom of religion or belief, is under threat in the region and globally. And so that comes out quite clearly in the report that we have done today, but also in previous reports, whether it's on hate speech or on the UPR in Southeast Asia, on FORB in Southeast Asia, coming from the UPR reports. It is important, Lutfi said that, yes, we've had this discussion before about Malaysia, but we need to have it over and over and over. And so I think it's important to keep the spotlight. Number two, I think, the Americans coming back to the United States, they have this expression, perfecting the union. Well, every single country on the planet is perfecting the union. And so that, of course, in the case of Southeast Asia, most countries is a process that in the modern sense started after World War II, and it's still very young process. That's not to excuse anything that's going on, but we have to recognize that historical context. And of course, freedom of religion, freedom of expression in that context are extremely intimately connected. So I'll leave that general thought there. And so the third point that came out that struck me is that the state is also an agent of intolerance, okay? Yes, there are brutal things said at the grassroots in society. And Subhas mentioned, well, there are how shall we say, things that should not be said. But the question is, how do we determine that? And surely if we try to determine that from a top level in systems where there is no proper judicial system and so on that can fairly adjudicate and so on, it becomes difficult. But I do agree for a bottom-up approach to all of this, where in a civil discourse with proper institutions and mechanisms that can fairly adjudicate, the citizenry can decide for themselves. The state, on the other hand, both you, Subhas, and Phillip mentioned this very important notion: young nations, who defines, how do you manage ethnicity? And so who defines what is a Chinese or what is a Malay, and so on. And that is the product of, historically, the elites that you, Subhas, have been talking about, all of you, in fact, right? So the very act of naming can breed intolerance, you know? Singapore, both Singapore and the Philippines, and of course Myanmar, are terribly diverse. Beyond Singapore, beyond Chinese, Malay, etc., Indian. These terms are very reductionist. And so you have these laws on the ISA, security, blasphemy, penal code, sedition, etc., etc. And then we are trying to update them with new harmony laws. Is that the best way? And so the suggestion was made about anti-discrimination laws. Well, and the need for independent commission that has come up. So broadly, I think those are three, four important points that I tease out. And last two things. One is, first is that James, the report mentions the impact. So I won't go over those again, you know, on different areas related to freedom of religion or belief, whether it's conversion, whether it's interfaith marriage, controlling the use of religious signifiers, etc., etc. Very problematic areas under these existing laws. And finally, the last point I will say is in terms of the recommendations, both from the report, but also coming out of this discussion. Of course, we would strongly encourage, for example, special rapporteurs to make increasing visits, to be invited by the respective countries, whether on freedom of religion or belief, for example, yeah, in particular. It's in the interests of the countries themselves to take advantage of these mechanisms, right? To make an assessment at the minimum, which is in their own interests. And I come back to something that James mentioned in relation to our report, which is many things, but one point, maybe the last point, is about faith-based groups. They do have a role to play, a very important role to play in terms of, throughout this discussion, issues of radicalization, issues of disinformation, issues of law reform. Well, the faith-based leaders must have an important role in that. And one important role, and this is a very absolute last point as we finish, is how can faith-based leaders separate out themselves, assuming they would like to, from the hustle and bustle of politics. I think that is something that's very much part of the problem, that we have today. So faith-based leaders have to figure out to avoid being used for political ends, yeah, and so on. And so, the human rights language is not alien to the faith-based leader, but it needs localization at the community level and maybe in the different contexts. And I would end it there and say again, thank you to all the presenters, the speakers, all the participants. And with that said, I turn it back over to James and Balazs, or Balazs and James.
Thank you. I will pass it on to James to finish all the proceedings.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Once again, to flag, that we are having our annual conference this year on freedom of expression in Asia in Bangkok, 24 to 26 August. So the links will be sent to you in the chat room. So feel free to reach out and, we can explore partnership. We are also interested to promote the findings of the report. So we will be in touch with the relevant speakers today to see how we can collaborate to try to bring out the findings of the report further. Right now, before we end, we would like to take the customary group participant photo. So for those of you who are still with us, we invite you to turn on your video, everyone. So if you'd like to be part of this commemorative occasion, please turn on your video. I'll give you a minute or two to come online so we can have a nice picture with all of us together. So, also don't forget to fill in the questionnaire. Your feedback would be very, very much appreciated so that we can continue to improve our activities for you. So everyone, so I think we are all here. So let's all look up. Andrew, great to see you, and new friends as well. Ali and Destia, great to have you. So I'll count you down. So picture on 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. We'll do one more time. The smiles are not wide enough. So one more time. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Great to have you. Our shout out to the Association of Progressive Communication. Pavitra, thanks for your support around the report, and also our friends from the CFOP network. Once again, today is the launch of the 2-week conference. We have an activity almost every day. So please reach out. The details are online. And if you need further information, feel free to drop us a message or an email. Otherwise, from all of us here in Bangkok to all of you out there across different time zone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Bye-bye.